Hey guys, just checking in. It's been a while, and there's been some things on my mind that I've been wanting to talk about, and it's really not anything crazy, just some ideas that process that kind of are always bubbling away in the back of my head, and I kind of wanted to verbalize it and just get some things out into the world. So, if you don't mind me looking like hot hell tonight, um, let's talk about. I want to talk about fights. I want to talk about what's a fight. What does it mean to fight? What's conflict? These are things that I think that we don't have a great understanding of as individuals. We know what a battle is. We know what a war is in the sense of a nation, in the sense of hyperbole. We're going to have a battle, a war on drugs, and all of this nonsense, right? But what does it really mean to have conflict? What does it really mean to have a war, a battle? So sit tight. I think I'm going to plan to expound on this um, across a variety of different directions, a bit at a time, as my thoughts are in order on it. So let's just start this off with what is a conflict. A conflict can happen either on the scale of one to one, or even 1 to 0, maybe, if you think about conflict within yourself, or millions versus millions when we think about like the military and we think about nation states going to war and this sort of thing. We see it every day. We see a model of conflict in our sports teams, in our American politics for sure. Anytime you have multiple positions all focused on the same target, right? So think about a target as maybe a resource, because why do these multiple actors want this resource? It's because it can be utilized in some way. So that's why I use the word resource. Um, in politics, that resource is voters. In American politics, the resource is voters, is trying to sway a voter, for example, in one direction or another, so that the larger party can enact its platform, ostensibly because a lot of voters support that platform, and therefore they're doing what those voters would like to see done with the country. But very simply, in order to enact that platform. And so you see the same thing in sports. In basketball, you have two opposing teams. The conflict is over control of the ball, the resource, the ball, in order to place it into the hoop and get points. And the more you control the ball, in theory, the more points you score, and that is the ultimate determinant of who has won the conflict. You see that play out across all organized sports. Really, there's a centralized resource: the puck, the football, the baseball, the soccer ball. It's really about control in order to determine the direction, what's going to happen with that resource, and who ultimately decides it. Now, if we go back to Government 101, that is the most simple, widely accepted consensus definition of politics, right? Is who decides who gets what, when, and how, right? All the W questions, it's who decides those things. That's politics in a nutshell. But I'm talking about conflict, not just politics. So let's swing it back over to conflict. Now, one thing that I've been thinking about is ultimately we struggle individually with being able to understand how to manage conflict, how to engage in the conflict, how to fight within that conflict, but how to do those things appropriately and ethically. And there are going to be some people that will say, well, an ethical fight is you're not really fighting, you're making things difficult for yourself. And I disagree, There's a way to fight. Um, go ask any well trained martial artist that has ever looked into self defense laws, and there is absolutely an ethical manner of fighting. Just having your life at stake is insufficient for completely changing the life direction of the attacker, because you can neutralize the conflict far less violently. So we struggle with, how do we go about this fight? How do we fight whatever fight it is, and how do we do it well? How do we identify what kind of a fight it is, which I'll get to? And what's the best way to address that fight without doing it unethically? So here's where I'm at. I think you can break down fights into 3 different types of fights. And it's really interesting because if you understand literature, right, there are 3 fundamental stories that are told. And everything you read, everything on TV, every show, anything you watch, always is one of these 3 stories: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus self. So, man versus man is as it sounds. It's one person pitted against another person for whatever reason, and the story being told is the conflict between those 2 people, the nature of the conflict, the evolution of the conflict, and hopefully the resolution of the conflict. Man versus nature is, man's conflict, often existential, within nature. So that's where you get your Robinson Crusoe type story. How does man overcome the difficulties of living on this earth in the face of difficulties that he has no control over? And then man versus self is very much that inner psychological, spiritual conflict that a person has to engage in and resolve. Now, there's an interesting correlation in martial arts. Depending on which dialect and which culture is talking about it, I know it as sanchin. It's a Okinawan kata and form that's in a couple of different martial arts. In different Chinese arts, it's known as samjian. And I know there's a couple other variations I'm drawing a blank on at the moment. Roughly translated to 3 battles, right? So battle of the mind, battle of the spirit, battle of the body. Sounds very familiar, right? Battle over being able to control and determine your own body, battle over your mind and keeping your mind straight and clean and clear, battle over your spirit, being able to have a strong heart and the right heart for whatever's at hand. So we already have some sort of more universal, culturally ubiquitous parallels and paradigms in terms of how to understand conflicts. What does that have to do with knowing and being able to have a fight? Well, for one, we've got to know what fight to have, right? Oftentimes, people do the wrong thing. They'll mistake a spiritual fight, right? A fight versus themselves, for a fight with an enemy, a fight with somebody in their life that maybe they said something or did something that struck the first person the wrong way, and their initial response is to lash out at that person without realizing that they're projecting. If you read or are familiar with Carl Jung, he'll talk about projection quite a bit as really just being projection is what you do with those parts of yourself and your personality and your psyche that you do not address, that you repress, you pushed down deep inside, but ultimately your inner self cannot be completely oppressed. It has to be expressed in some manner. And projection comes in on those parts of yourself that you have been neglecting for a long time until it can no longer stand to be oppressed or repressed, and you project it out to another person. That's why people often say, people will say that you don't like in others what you don't like about yourself. That's classic example of projection, and that's sort of a hallmark of mistaking an enemy without for the enemy within. Right? That's your battle of spirit that you're treating as a battle against man. So that's just sort of one example. We don't know necessarily the right fight. Are we fighting the fight that we think that we're fighting? That doesn't even talk about how you go about winning that battle. So why is any of this important? Like, look around your world, look around the people around your house and your family, the people that you work with, the circumstances that you've had in your life, your economic circumstances, your environmental circumstances, your cultural circumstances. When you account for these three categories of conflict, you are always in a battle. Always. There's always a front that you are fighting. There's always a trench that you're in. The question is which one and on what matter. And if you don't know how to fight, if you don't know how to engage the inner soldier, the inner warrior, without it sounding like a really terrible internet nonsense, without being able to really bear down internally and dial in to this inner fighter, you're not gonna make progress on anything that you need. If you are in a difficult place physically, right? Man versus nature. You're stuck living in a community that you don't see eye to eye with, one that is very difficult for you to live in, not just economically, but personally, emotionally. Maybe you're surrounded by a lot of people that you don't like and they don't like you, and your life is unpleasant as a result. Right? That's sort of man versus environment, man versus nature, man versus man, maybe. And if you don't figure out how to overcome that challenge, because that's really what the conflict is. It's a challenge. It's an opposition to your desired goal. That's an opposition to you. So how do you overcome that opposition? That's the same as a battle. Somebody you are competing with for determining the control of a resource. So that's the importance of battles. Once you figure out the value of being able to bear down and fight, not just fight for your life because you're, in the wrong alley at the wrong time or, something like that, but fight for your life to build the life that you want, to overcome the challenges that are in front of you, to defeat the opposition that's standing across from you. Until you figure that out, you can look around and you can know that nothing will change. That's the importance of understanding battles and conflicts and how ubiquitous they are, how much they surround you in all of your life. But once you do acknowledge that, now you can start to elevate. You can begin to analyze what the battles are, how best to fight them. And after that, it becomes very simple. you're just doing the fight. It's just the thing that you do. You overcome the obstacle, you overcome the challenge. And then you can start thinking in a more elevated manner about other things and how you can accomplish the things you want to accomplish, how you want to put yourself in the position you want to be in, how you can surround yourself with the kind of people you want to be surrounded by, because that's a challenge in itself, right? You can judge a lot of people and by the quality of the people around them. And you can forecast how high you can elevate yourself based on the elevation of the people around you. So there's a lot that you can do once you determine the fight. That's probably enough blathering. I'm really kind of going off the rails at this point. It's been 15 minutes of going on about battles and nonsense, but this is the kind of thing that I think about a lot. And I'll probably be talking about more in smaller bites and more focused bites.